the most empathetical people are people who suffer in silence. Why do I say that? I say that because a person that suffers in silence, and when I say suffer in silence, I mean a person that suffers in silence does not have support. A person that understands what it's like to suffer and have no understanding and compassion from other people is going to have more compassion for people because they understand the meaning of the word understood and misunderstood. In our society, suffering is very conditional. Society's definition of the word suffering is very conditional. There is socially accepted forms of suffering, and then there's socially unaccepted forms of suffering. Both of which are suffering, both of which destroy your peace, but one, people will say, I'm sorry to hear that you're going through that. The other, people will look at you like you're crazy, and they won't fucking give you any empathy at all. So, let me give you an example of socially accepted forms of suffering. You live with an alcoholic. That's socially accepted suffering. It's suffering, don't get me wrong, it's suffering, but most people will say, I'm sorry to hear that. Most people, you'll get lots of support from other people. There's a huge community that you can get support off of. That doesn't mean that that doesn't mean that it's not suffering. You're still suffering, but you get lots of approbation. You get lots of validation. You get lots of all of that from dealing with that. If you, for example, have money issues, again, there's lots of empathy for that. If you've got even if, let's say you're a nicotine addict or something, that's suffering, but there's lots of empathy for that. There is lots of empathy. Or if you're suffering because of someone who's an addict, there's lots of empathy for that. All right? Again, not saying that those people aren't suffering. All right? My heart still goes out to them, but I know that they get lots of emotional support. Now, let's say that you're someone that suffers from obsessive compulsive disorder. Most people think of obsessive compulsive disorder as being organized. Some people even think that it makes you smart, all right? People don't understand obsessive compulsive disorder. Obsessive compulsive disorder is a reality warping condition, all right? It is, in its worst manifestation, it can warp your reality like schizophrenia. Maybe not in the same way, but it can absolutely warp your perception of reality, all right? It can even lead you to believing things that aren't true. OCD can take you out of an experience. The average human being has about 20,000 thoughts in their mind every day. A person with OCD probably has twice as many thoughts every day. Their mind is constantly busy. A person who has severe OCD, they could be eating delicious food and they can't taste it. A person that has severe OCD could be doing an activity that they enjoy that they can't be present with or enjoy. A person with OCD could be having sex and they can't have sex. They could be having sex but they couldn't experience it. They could be making out and they don't even know that they're doing it. They know that they're doing it, but they don't know that they're doing it because the anxiety and all the intrusive thoughts and all that shit literally takes you out of the moment. But likewise, a person with OCD, when their mind is clear, all right, they can experience that situation and that moment even more profoundly. I believe people with OCD have a magnified experience of life. Emotionally, they're the equivalent of a person with very, very acute hearing. Right? Imagine in the movies, a person that has really, really acute hearing. If, for example, an object falls off a shelf in a room and hits the ground and it's like, ooh, really loud, and the guy or the person in the movie just gets down because of that serious noise. People with OCD experience that, but they experience that over events. They experience that over gestures. They experience that over little things. People with OCD, they live a damn fucking tortured existence. They have a bully in their mind at all times, constantly trying to make deals with them. They're always making deals with the devil because the devil is always attacking the things that are closest to their heart. OCD is not about being organized. OCD is not about looking neat. OCD is a condition it's a condition that's probably on the suffering level. It's on the level of drug addiction. All right? But the thing is, it gets zero. Well, not zero, but it gets very, very little empathy. Instead, what will happen is a person who has OCD, when he or she falls short in some aspects in their life, in certain moments, people who never struggled with that condition will judge them on the fact that they fell short on that moment, rather than seeing them for the whole individual that they are and understanding that in the right moment, when they're not fucking besieged in their mind, they can be a fucking pleasure, right? They can be awesome. They can be great to be. They can be very engaging, right? This person can be very engaging. This person can work hard. This person can be all of this shit. Most people will look at a person with OCD who's struggling so much and they'll think, oh, this person is lazy, or this person, why are you falling short in this? Or why are you, what's going on? They won't understand you, all right? And that's the thing, when you suffer from OCD, not only are you suffering from the condition and you don't have emotional support, on top of that, you get punished for having a condition in the first place. So not only are you suffering from the condition, you're also suffering from the stigma that's attached to it. And all that serves to do is make it even worse. And the one thing that human beings, they strive for the most is to be understood. We want to be understood. And people who have OCD, and people in general who suffer from problems, because there's many different problems, like OCD, doesn't even have to be a mental issue, but problems that are not socially accepted forms of suffering, widely, socially, colloquially accepted forms of suffering, experience, and from experiencing that, they understand the meaning of the word misunderstood. They understand what it means to be misunderstood. And that's why they have more empathy for people, because oftentimes when they're dealing with another person, let's say they're in traffic and somebody, is someone's driving too slow or somebody cut in front of them, rather than beeping right away, they might be thinking, well, maybe this person's mind was too full and he wasn't paying attention. People who go and just slam on the horn and they're like, what the fuck are you doing? You're an idiot, you're a retard and stuff. People who are loud, I call these people who do that are the mentally weakest people that you will ever meet. They're the loudest and they look like the most intimidating and strongest people, but they're the mentally weakest people because they have such a small mental breaking point. But people who suffer in silence from conditions that aren't understood, from problems that most people don't care about, all right? They understand the meaning of misunderstood. They're always suffering from something and they have to manage that while they try to go and live their life. And so they have a much higher mental breaking point. So while they are empathetical and it looks like they're not strong, they're strong like a motherfucker, because they can be subjected to a lot of pressure and still make level-headed choices. People like that possess qualities that are often sought after in leadership. So what I'm saying is, yes, you have socially accepted, socially unaccepted forms of suffering. Suffering is suffering. Suffering does not discriminate. Suffering does not give a fuck if it's socially accepted or not. It's still suffering. Suffering is suffering. Pain is pain. All right? Dissonance is dissonance. It does not give a fuck about the subject matter. It does not give a fuck about whether it's accepted by society or not. Dissonance is dissonance. But society has definitions around that. There's socially accepted, socially unaccepted forms of suffering. And people who suffer from conditions in silence that people don't understand or would judge them for have more, will on average, not all the time, have more empathy because they understand the meaning of being misunderstood. I would actually argue, if you're looking for a therapist, the absolute worst therapist is a person who became a therapist because they just like to help people. You'll ask them and they'll be, I just like to help people. No. You just wanted a job, it pays you good money, you went to school, you go by the book, and that's it. Psychology is not something that you can just go by the book on. If you're trying to help a person who's dealing with some issue in their life with themselves, psychological problem, you have to have experienced the problem in order to be able to really help this person. Because otherwise you will never truly understand a person. I've never had schizophrenia. I don't want to have schizophrenia. I don't want anybody to have it. Can I help a person with schizophrenia? I can try to. Certainly I have empathy for them because I've had OCD, so I don't judge them on that basis. And I'll use an example. And again, I'm not bragging about myself. I absolutely do not want to brag about myself because I'm not calling myself better than other people. But I'm going to say this. I knew a guy, he was an acquaintance of mine, and that guy, he clearly had some psychotic condition. When he'd come home, he would see things that aren't there. He'd hear things that aren't there. He'd see a fucking dog that isn't there, run up to him and disappear right before reaching him. He'd see all kinds of shit. And I listened to him. And having been through what I've been through, dealing with what I deal with, I listened to him and I tried to understand him. And you know what he said? He said, I could never have this conversation with my brother. My brother would just tell me, you are insane. You're fucking crazy. Why the fuck would you think like that? That's how he would have talked to him. I did not talk to him that way. Made a huge difference. You see, when you struggle with a condition, people don't understand. And there's many different forms of suffering. It doesn't even have to be a psychological problem. There's many different things, many different forms of suffering, sources of suffering, that society often overlooks. They completely overlook. And I would say, and I would argue that the worst, in fact, are the ones that are overlooked. It's not the ones that get the most attention. It's the ones that get little attention. Those are the worst because not only does the person deal with a problem, but on top of that, they get zero support, or worse, they get negative support. Done.